Hello everyone, I'm Mike DiVerde and I'm an aerospace engineer. Today I'm wearing my International Space Station shirt. I was a structural design lead engineer at McDonnell Douglas Space Systems in Huntington Beach, California, and I worked on the space station truss segments that flew up on the space shuttle. In today's episode of Robots in Space, we will discuss the Chandra X-Ray Observatory and its findings on the Centaurus A radio galaxy, along with the related research on galactic cosmic rays. NASA's Chandra X-Ray Observatory is a telescope specially designed to detect X-ray emission from very hot regions of the universe, such as exploded stars, clusters of galaxies, and matter around black holes. Because X-rays are absorbed by the Earth's atmosphere, Chandra must orbit above it, up to an altitude of about 87,000 miles in space. Chandra carries 4 very sensitive mirrors nested inside each other. The energetic X-rays strike the insides of the hollow shells and are focused on the electronic detectors at the end of the 30-foot optical bench. Depending on which detector is used, very detailed images or spectra of the cosmic source can be made and analyzed. Chandra has imaged the spectacular glowing remains of exploded stars and taken spectra, showing the dispersal of elements. Chandra has observed the region around the supermassive black hole in the center of our Milky Way and found black holes across the universe. Eileen Collins was commander of the 1999 Columbia STS-93 mission, which included the deployment of the Chandra X-Ray Observatory. She became the first and only female shuttle commander during that mission. The high-resolution camera is one of 2 instruments used at the focus of Chandra, where it detects X-rays reflected from an assembly of 8 mirrors. The unique capabilities of the high-resolution camera stem from the close match of its imaging capability to the focusing power of the mirrors. When used with the Chandra mirrors, the high-resolution camera can make images that reveal detail as small as 1/2 an arcsecond. This is equivalent to the ability to read a newspaper at a distance of 1/2 mile. The primary components of the high-resolution camera are 2 microchannel plates. They each consist of a 4-inch square cluster of 69 million tiny lead oxide glass tubes that are about 10 micrometers in diameter and 50 thousandths of an inch long. The tubes have a special coating that causes electrons to be released when the tubes are struck by X-rays. These electrons are accelerated down the tube by a high voltage, releasing more electrons as they bounce off the sides of the tube. By the time they leave the end of the tube, they have created a cloud of 30 million electrons. A cross grid of wires detects this electronic signal and allows the position of the original X-ray to be determined with high precision. With this information, astronomers can construct a finely detailed map of the cosmic X-ray source. The high-resolution camera is especially useful for imaging hot matter in remnants of exploded stars and in distant galaxies and clusters of galaxies, and for identifying very faint sources. This is a color composite photo of the galaxy Centaurus A, also known as NGC 5128. Obtained with the Wide Field Imager camera at the European Southern Observatory in La Silla, Chile, combined with X-ray images from Chandra. The elliptical shape and the central dust band, the imprint of a galaxy collision, are quite visible. Centaurus A is the closest active galaxy to Earth, with prominent radio jets located about 13 million light years away. Its jets extend over 1 million light years.
This is the giant elliptical galaxy Centaurus A. Radio and X-ray images reveal features associated with jets driven by the galaxy's supermassive black hole. Now, the Astronomy project has provided the best ever view of these jets. In this radio image of the galaxy's core, the black hole is invisible, but the jets show in great detail. Features as small as 15 light days across can be resolved. The powerful jets feed vast loads of radio-emitting gas that reach far beyond the visible galaxy.
Centaurus A is a fascinating object that showcases some of the most dramatic jet structures we can observe. Here are 10 key features that make it special. Number 1, the galaxy itself appears to be the result of a merger between a large elliptical galaxy and a smaller spiral galaxy. 2, it has a distinctive dark dust lane across its middle, making it instantly recognizable. 3, its radio jets extend outward for over 1 million light years, creating giant lobes that span about 8 to 10 degrees of sky. 4, the jets emanate from a supermassive black hole at the center, with a mass of about 55 million times that of our Sun. The jets are visible across multiple wavelengths: radio, X-ray, and gamma ray. 6, the jets contain highly energetic particles moving at close to the speed of light. That was very particular of interest to all of us, right? 7, it's the closest active galactic nuclei to Earth. And this proximity allows astronomers to study jet structure and the evolution in unprecedented detail. 8, it helps us understand how jets interact with and heat the surrounding intergalactic medium. 9, observations have revealed complex substructures within the jets, including knots and filaments. And 10, the jets are creating shock waves in the surrounding gas. Supermassive black holes in the centers of active galaxies are also significant sources of galactic cosmic rays. The relativistic jets, also called active galactic nuclei or AGN jets, the relativistic jets from supermassive black holes are powerful particle accelerators. These jets, 1, shoot out from both poles of the black hole at nearly the speed of light. 2, create shock waves that can accelerate particles to extremely high energies. That's an important point for all of us on this one. 3, generate strong magnetic fields that further accelerate particles. That also is key. And 4, can extend for thousands or even millions of light years. These jets are particularly effective at producing ultra-high energy cosmic rays, which have energies above 10 to the 18th electron volts, also known as exa-electron volts, which are a billion billions of electron volts. Sound like Carl Sagan. In fact, active galactic nuclei jets are thought to be one of the few cosmic accelerators powerful enough to create the highest energy cosmic rays we observe. However, it's important to note that black hole jets are just one of several sources of galactic cosmic rays working alongside 1, supernova explosions, and their remnants, 2 pulsar wind nebulae, 3 star-forming regions also known as starburst galaxies, and 4 other extreme cosmic environments. The relative contribution of black hole jets versus other sources varies depending on the energy range of the cosmic rays being considered, with jets being particularly important for the highest energy particles. The star-forming regions, also known as starburst galaxies, constantly manufacture a lot of huge stars. The massive stars live fast and die young in supernova explosions, and the forces created by the collective shockwaves of all the supernovas might be what accelerates cosmic rays. Ultra-high energy cosmic rays have an energy of more than 10 to the 18th electron volts. Cosmic rays with such high energies can give information about their source. Cosmic rays with lower energies are usually deflected by magnetic fields and thus do not provide reliable information about the origin of cosmic rays. The fact that the event of an ultra-high energy cosmic ray reaching Earth is extremely rare makes experiments very challenging. The arrival rate of cosmic rays with an energy of more than 10 to the 18th electron volts is only 1 particle per square kilometer per year. Researchers recorded 27 highest energy events with energy above 60 exaelectron volts and compared the arrival directions of the cosmic rays with known positions of active galactic nuclei, which presumably constitute a source of ultra-high energy cosmic rays. The study of the galaxy Centaurus A, which is about 10 to 16 million light-years distant from Earth, provided some evidence of a correlation between the events and the position of the galaxy. Centaurus A contains an active galactic nucleus, which is presumably powered by a black hole in the center of the galaxy. Quoting from the research paper entitled An Indication of Anisotropy in Arrival Directions of Ultra-High Energy Cosmic Rays through comparison to the flux pattern of extragalactic gamma ray sources. A new analysis of the data set from the Pierre Auger Observatory provides evidence for anisotropy in the arrival directions of ultra-high energy cosmic rays on an intermediate angular scale, which is indicative of excess arrivals from strong nearby sources. The data consists of 5,514 events above 20 exaelectron volts with zenith angles up to 80 degrees recorded before 2017 April 30. Sky models have been created for 2 distinct populations of extragalactic gamma ray emitters: active galactic nuclei from the second catalog of hard Fermi-Lat sources, and starburst galaxies from a sample that was examined with Fermi-Lat. Quoting from the research paper, the active galactic nuclei and starburst galaxy populations are well motivated physically. Active galactic nuclei are favored source candidates because their jets and radiolobes satisfy the Hillis criteria for shock acceleration. Starburst galaxies, being loci of intense star formation, potentially have increased rates of extreme events associated with the deaths of their short-lived massive stars, such as gamma ray bursts, hypernovae, and magnetars. Their winds have also been proposed as possible re-acceleration sites. The X-ray sky observed by SwiftBat is dominated in flux by the nearby Centaurus A, often considered as a prime ultra-high energy cosmic ray source candidate, with additional diffuse structures arising from both radio loud and radio quiet active galactic nuclei. This constitutes a different selection of active galactic nuclei from that performed for the gamma ray sample, radio loud only, dominated by the radio galaxies Centaurus A and M87 within 20 megaparsecs, and by the blazars Markarian 421 and Markarian 501 within 200 megaparsecs. So here is my summary. Trying to locate the primary sources of galactic cosmic rays is very difficult. First is that they vary on particle mass from tiny proton up through radioactive iron ions. Second, they vary wildly on energy levels, from slow and low energy to high energy traveling at close to the speed of light. Third, they interact with extragalactic magnetic fields, the Milky Way galaxy's magnetic field, our sun's heliosphere, and the Earth's magnetosphere. The path of a galactic cosmic ray is rarely straight. There are a series of potential types of sources of galactic cosmic rays, and there are different energy levels that might be associated with each source. In the realm of ultra-high energy cosmic rays, there is mounting evidence that active galactic nuclei, which have supermassive central black holes and colossal jets sprouting normal to the galactic disk, are the primary source of these incredibly dangerous streams of ion beams traveling at close to the speed of light. The closest example of an active galactic nuclei is in the Centaurus A galaxy. We on Earth have the shielding of the magnetosphere and the atmosphere, so we are safe. Astronauts, cosmonauts, and tauconauts on the Moon or Mars or traveling within our solar system are unprotected and at extreme risk. OmniFuturists.
Robots in space.
All right, Ramon, thank you so much for your time. You're a fantastic omnifuturist. You're both a digital artist and a physical artist. You've created both of our book covers for Future Visions. You're also a writer, an author. You've written in our books. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, please?
Well, as far as my artistic career as Art Ramon, got back into artistic stuff back in 2016, I think it was, or 2015, and started with oil painting and, developed my skill. I was getting better. At first, I did a lot of abstract just because it's easy to get back into painting when you do abstract. And then I started going towards what I really like is like surreal type paintings. And surrealism is my goal. That's what I like, surrealism. But it takes a lot more skill to do surrealism. So I just got to keep at it, keep practicing. And then I got involved with the OmniFuturists. And then, I was an English minor. So I used to be a very good writer. Unfortunately, COVID kind of set me back. I don't quite have the mind I used to. I used to be able to sort of mentally draft a lot. Just mentally draft and then drink some coffee and go out and bang it out. And I don't quite have that ability anymore. So now writing is a bit different. So now I just have to kind of bang it out any way I can. Then I use a little bit of AI to clean it up, get rid of all the grammar, crappy grammar. but that's how I use AI now, and especially with art, using AI for art is also an advantage because I don't have time to draw everything. I do have a full-time job and trying to do these side hustles. Sometimes I just don't have the time, and a lot of the digital art I've been doing with, especially with AI, I feed my own art into it, so it's not a word prompt always. So that one in particular for the hand there, that was one of my oil paintings that I'm working on. That kind of has the stalactites on the palm, which is sort of ferromagnetic fluid. Is kind of what I'm sort of trying to depict there, because when you put an electric field to a ferromagnetic fluid, it has all those little spiky cones. So that's what I was trying to sort of depict with my painting, but I fed it into AI, and that's what it spat out, one of the images. And yeah, I kind of just go with it, and I have very simple editing abilities with like GIMP, and it's usually enough. And I think that cover there, I created that one with Canva. So Canva is another tool I use. So yeah, that's kind of how I've evolved as an artist since 2015.
I'm going to ask you to tell a little bit about the inspiration for the original book cover. I
Oh,
like
yeah.
that story.
Yeah, that was a bit of a paranormal story. And it was, what, 2023? I think it happened. Yeah, it was 2023 when I was sleeping and I had kind of this brightness in the room, like, someone turned on the lights, and I cracked open my eyes and I saw from the corner of my room, which is what that image depicts, is the corner of the room where I have a sonos speaker kind of mounted halfway up. Like light was coming from the corner of the room, and this blocky headed character appeared there, and it quickly moved up next to me, and I basically pass out. It knocked me out. And then when it knocked me out, it felt like I was having dreams where I'm kind of walking with this blocky headed figure, and we're just kind of walking and talking. He's like showing me stuff. I don't know where I'm at, but we're having a walk and talk basically. And I know we're going down this road or something other. It's very open, but he's basically showing me things. So I don't know where I was, but it felt like a dream at that point. And then I came to, I woke up suddenly, sat up in my bed. I'm like, something happened. I just woke up from something that happened, and I'm looking around, and everything in my room looks very grainy, like I would say, like big pixels. So that's one of the things I depict in that painting. There is like these large pixels everywhere, and I don't know what I called them eye floaters for the longest time. So there were like these eye floaters everywhere, these large pixels. I felt there was something in the room, but kind of like cloaked, or it was cloaked and visible somehow, and I couldn't see anything, so just went back to bed. So,
Well,
yeah.
I can see now why your book covers are so interesting. Those are very inspiring. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your chapter that you wrote?
Yeah, in Future Visions there, I wrote the redirection of human purpose. So I envision a scenario in the future where, everyone, like economic singularity, people are going to be unemployed. So what are people going to do? Humans have always been artisans. You've always had that artisan class. So along with the warrior class, ruling class. So you've always had this artisan class, and you haven't had much of it in modern society because you've got to do other work. They don't value artisans as much in say current societies because there are other work to be done. So the artisan class has been minimized, and I think there's just a larger percentage of people who would rather be in the artisan class. And in the future, if there are no jobs and people are still around, you have to put people to do something, and why not something that they're naturally attracted to, which is the arts. And it's not just the visual arts, but the performing arts, the music, all the arts in general. People would want to be in that particular area. And in the future, if we don't have to work, I think that's what we need to sort of promote, because that hasn't been promoted, because it was very difficult to make it in the arts. But in the future, if people are getting some sort of basic income of any type, I don't know, they have to think of something, because there's going to be a lot of unemployed people. You have to put people and give them purpose. So these people who want to be artists of any type, help them become the artist. And the government's going to have to do this somehow, because like I said in my other book, they control all the resources. So you can't control all the resources and say, sorry, we can't help you, because people just can't go out to anywhere and hunt, because everything's owned and controlled. You can't just go grow food somewhere because someone owns it. So, and it's usually, government owns a lot of the property, a lot of the land in the country. You do have private property, but a person cannot just go out and fend for themselves. You cannot. Everything is in control. So when the government has control of all the resources, they need to provide for the people. So that's kind of the idea. There are a lot of art programs now. They're getting cut by the Trump administration, but they're going to have to figure out something in the future, because you're going to have a lot of angry people, and you're either going to have to pay people to make art, or you're going to have to pay people to police other people. And that's going to be just as expensive. I think it would be decades before they have actual robot cops policing the people. But in the interim, you're going to have to have people police other people. And do you really want a surveillance state? I mean, it's going to cripple society if you just have a restrictive, surveillance state. It's not going to grow or evolve. So my ideas, I present some ideas, some suggestions, basically piggybacking on previous ideas of kind of the federal works programs that they had back in the 40s to get people back to work. And they supported artists back then. So somehow these governments of today are going to have to figure something out and get people motivated, get people working in the arts or anything else that they would fund, like infrastructure projects, where they need people to work in. So I'm putting a lot of responsibility on the government, just for the sole fact that they control everything.
That makes sense. It was a very good chapter. Now, tell me, do you think that the economic singularity is likely to occur in the next 10 years? If not, when, if ever?
Yeah, I think so, definitely, within the next 10 years. I mean, with all the changes that the Trump administration is doing with the layoffs of federal employees, I myself am a federal employee. I didn't take the offer to resign. So there was a lot of people who were probationary and got laid off. So, if it was already a tough job market for other people, I work in IT. If it was already a tough job market for other people, now imagine all these new unemployed federal workers competing with them. So it's going to be very difficult. A lot of the companies that do the software, they're integrating AI to make it even simpler, so that there's fewer people actually required to work a lot of the IT systems. So it's displacing people in IT having smarter programs. So I'm trying to make a shift myself. I'm currently doing a lot of storage. I want to get back into servers just because it's a bit more complicated and not as easy to replace with an AI. So that's one of the changes I'm trying to do. But yeah, it's going to happen. You're going to have massive unemployment, and you're going to have the disruption that massive unemployment is going to cause. And I do see the abundance being at the end, superabundance being at the end of the economic cycle, but we have to get there somehow. And it's that chasm we have to cross. So the people who are in charge and control the resources need to figure something out. And that's why I put a lot of the responsibility on them. Because otherwise, if it's just people organizing, well, there's only so much you can do with the lack of money. And then it just becomes an armed revolt after that, because what else do they do? So,
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you're facing this sort of challenge with the changes that are going on in the federal government. I wish you well. I've been through a lot of transformations in my career, so they're never easy. They're always wrenching. Since you're already starting to talk about it, how would you define the onset of the economic singularity? You're already starting to see some indicators of potential. How would you define it?
well, it's going to be the all the layoffs. I mean, it's happening now. You have Elon Musk rolling out his Doge, and that's one of the things he's doing. He's trying to get rid of a lot of the excess, or he would consider excess workers. And in fact, they're actually required, because people who were retiring, you have these workers who are new workers, they're probationary, but they're replacing older workers, and now you're not going to have those replacements. So yeah, the older workers who are retiring. So yeah, unemployed people, no jobs, you can't find a job. What do? There's only so much benefit you can get from unemployment, from the state, and they might have some sort of stimulus like they did during COVID. But after that, what do you do when you have no job? You can't find a job. They say there's going to be new jobs that come into existence, but not everyone is going to be able to make those jobs or do those jobs. Even if you have AI as a tool, AI is a tool, but you also have to know enough about something to ask the right questions. You could try to get it to educate you, but it's a lot to understand. And then you have to understand enough to be able to ask the right questions. And I've seen like people who are financial experts, ask very complicated questions of AI. And that's something that I couldn't even start to do, because I have a much simpler understanding of economics and finances. And these people who do a lot of investing, they have a much greater understanding and can ask those right questions. So it's not just, hey, where do I put my money in the stock market? So it's even with AI, people who are displaced are going to have a tough time finding alternative, income.
You're good. Yeah, I have to agree with everything you're saying there. And you've already hinted on this, do you ever think that we'll get to superabundance and the end of scarcity? Do you think that's realistic?
I'm hopeful that we'll get there. I just hope it's not the eliminating the excess population, which I don't trust governments entirely, especially with, all the bioweapons that have gotten out. What's to keep governments saying, well, we have too many people, we can't find them all jobs and make them productive. Let's release the bioweapons. So I mean, it's dystopian. That's dystopian scenario, but I don't trust the governments not to do something like that. Oops, it slipped.
Well, speaking of trust, are you concerned at all about the arrival of superintelligence?
Not itself. I think it's more a problem with people wielding superintelligence improperly. So I don't think superintelligence is going to get its own agenda and say humans are, a scourge on the planet. Let me, take care of them. I don't think that's going to be the scenario, not the Skynet scenario. I think it's going to be more, certain actors on the global stage, fighting for resources with other countries, other groups, using AI maliciously, super intelligent AI. So that's where I see the danger from. If you have a super intelligent AI that can sort of butterfly effect, massive changes against an enemy. So I think that was even depicted in a movie I saw one time, where they had a super intelligent AI. The military did, and they were basically using it to butterfly affect changes that they wanted. things that a human would never think of. The super intelligent AI was able to think of certain little things they could do that would cause that cascade of events that they wanted to see happen. So,
Hey, what other topic might be first and foremost in your mind? For example, like space travel and colonization, or super longevity, or crypto, geopolitics, quantum mechanics, and quantum computers. Do you have another topic that you really dig into?
yeah, super longevity. I'm hopeful that that's going to happen also. I think it's going to be towards that super abundance end. The companies that are sort of working on super longevity, I mean, they're companies trying to make money. So they have to sell it as a product. And I think if they're developing it as a product, you can't just sell to the elites. They're too tiny of a customer base. So they need to sell it to the populace. And I think, it's going to replace the cosmetics industry and a lot of maybe surgical industry that does cosmetic procedures. And that's their consumer base they could market to once they have a really good therapy. And, right now there may not be much interest from the public because they think it's kind of the pie in the sky idea. But once it starts to happen to somebody, it's going to be FOMO. So everyone's going to want it, not left out. The thing is, will they be able to afford it during that chasm of economic suffering? So it's possible that during that time, it's just going to be the people at the top, the 1%, getting the therapy. But in an unstable world, even that's not as secure for them. In an unstable world, nuclear weapons going off, they're just as hosed as everyone else. So they're not going to be able to insulate themselves, so much in their bunkers. Anything that happens to the planet happens to the people on the planet. It's going to happen to them. It's going to catch up to them.
You're talking about super longevity, and a very similar path we've had very recently with weight loss drugs. I'm diabetic, so I got really early access to Manjaro and lost a ton of weight, and my A1C dropped. These are all great things for my longevity. I'm not a spring chicken. I got to stretch it out until the real super longevity, the rejuvenation therapies come through. But I think same pathway is that once people see somebody who looked like they were 80 now is looking like they're 25 and they're out playing tennis, there's going to be a stampede. And so I think you're right. There's one other thing I want to go over with you, and I may catch you off guard. I do want to do some cross promotion here, and you've come up with a really clever kids book. Do you have a copy of it that you can show on the screen here for everybody?
Yes, I do.
Talk about this a little bit.
So
Perfect.
this kids book, it's a picture book. So I've seen other sort of kids book, but they're more of an older kids book. Gennady made one a decade ago. I've seen two others that are sort of transhumanism themed, but again, they're more of an older kids book. A lot of text, a whole page of text, and then some pictures. Whereas this is more of a picture book meant for younger kids. So the idea, the genesis of the idea, I mean, it never occurred to me, even though I knew about Gennady's book, kids book. So it never occurred to me until I was watching TikTok, and it was this Hispanic guy saying something to the effect that Hispanics were falling behind according to what an engineer was telling him. So I don't quite believe that. I see plenty of Hispanics in dentistry in the hospital. I don't see any Hispanics falling behind. Maybe a tiny subculture of Hispanics, kind of trapped into kind of the barrio. Maybe they don't have a way to escape that because they're just consumed by that thinking. But a lot of the Hispanics I know, they're in all sorts of fields. so I don't see them falling behind. But but he was saying this, that some engineer, I don't remember who it was. He was maybe like an intern or something with some company, and he was working with engineers. So it kind of sounded like he was an intern. And these engineers were telling him that Hispanics are falling behind, and they need a lot of children's books to sort of inspire them, to get into other, more advanced fields. So, and I was like, well, I could do that. I could make a children's book and inspire Hispanics. And I was like, and I could do it about transhumanism too. So within a few days, I already had the idea thought up, and it was just a matter of getting to it, creating a manuscript, you deciding what software I was going to use to create the images. And I think it only took me about 2 months. So in 2 months from when I got the idea to start, and I actually created the ebook and released it like right before Christmas of 2024. Yeah, I had the whole book completed. I did use AI, of course, because it would have taken me years to create all these images, and yeah, it would have taken me years. And this particular image in the front, I gave it one of my images of my art, and it created this. I just said, here's my artwork, generate a kid's version for a kid's picture book. And that's what it did. So it has elements of my painting. So
Those are so fun. Now for your friend, I think that I may know what he's thinking about, but as you know, I've worked in aerospace for 40 years. My boss is Antonio Sanchez. Okay. Throughout my 40 years, I have worked with Hispanic engineers. Okay. So in fact, there's a huge crew that I work with out of Brazil, and they're fantastic engineers. Okay. What he might have been referring to is, and you may know this also, that my kids are Mexican American. So I do have a little bit of familiarity with this. Turns out that the college graduation rate had been in the past lower for some Hispanics, and that was of concern. I think that had a lot more to do with college being ridiculously expensive. And I think this is another aspect of the singularity that's coming up, where people can get education without having to spend $100,000 a year to put their kids through college. So I think that he's a little bit misled, some old data from years past. I see plenty of Hispanics all over aerospace. So, that book that you just showed everybody is really beautiful graphics. And I understand you're also doing it in a series of bilingual editions, right? What
Correct.
languages have you done so far or thinking about doing?
So this is the original. So it was in English Spanish. So this was sort of meant to reach out towards Hispanics here in the U.S. So obviously English Spanish, and I did put some themes in it that a lot of Hispanics would sort of understand. So kind of an inside joke. So I did make it sort of for Hispanics in mind here in the U.S. And so, yeah, I put elements like my president accordion here, which looks a lot like kind of a Pancho Villa dude. So I put a lot of funny inside jokes in it, which may not always translate to other cultures around the planet, which I've been given some feedback in one of my French Arabic versions. He said it was too scary. I was like, well, I don't know if it's too scary. I did have mention of poverty and people out of work. So here I am mentioning people out of work. This is the economic singularity. So I address the economic singularity in the narrative. I do address war, but it's not an ugly image. I think maybe the scariest would be where I address the Day of the Dead. So I sort of addressed the Day of the Dead because, in Hispanic culture, it's a big thing, the Day of the Dead. And since we're, transhumanists who believe in longevity, it's like, how is that going to evolve from celebration of death to, wanting to live and celebration of life? So I kind of mentioned it in the narrative. And I think that's probably the scariest image of that. To Hispanic kids, that's not going to be scary. So,
I mean, if you think about all of the Halloween stuff, that's what I've seen in your book is not scary at all. There's a limit to how much sugar coating kids should have to put up with. But anyway, I'm glad that you had a chance to talk a little bit about this book. I can't wait to see next year's book cover from you, because we are planning another edition of Future Visions. Art Ramon, you've done a great job with us in the OmniFuturists, in your artwork, in your thought patterns, and in your writing. Thank you for your time today, my friend.
All right, thanks for having me. Oh.
Thanks, dude. OmniFuturists.
Robots in space.
Awesome.
I love the logo, man. Star Wars Resistance.
The
It's
Resistance.
perfect. It is.
And if I turn off my camera, it gets even better.
That is excellent, my friend.
Yeah, I am believing in the Resistance. And somebody asked me about it the other day, and I said, well, it started out as a political thing, and then but I realized, like, in The War on Art, and I'll think of the author in a moment, his book, The War on Art, he talks about resistance. Like, if you're trying to create something, whether it's a painting or a writing, like I like to do it, and or a sculpture or something, he says, if you're feeling resistance, that's what you need to push into. If it's easy, you already know how to do it. It's not going to engage your mind or your soul. You want to push into that stuff that's providing you some resistance. And then I saw that again. It was talking about exercise, right? So it's like, you can run all you want, but till you get some resistance, right, those muscles aren't going to get. And okay, not that necessarily hypertrophy is what I'm looking for in every aspect of my life, but muscular resistance, that emotional resistance, mental resistance, and these days political resistance.
Yes. Yeah, and that is certainly on my mind. Eileen Crowley, you're a long-term OmniFuturist. You're a great author in both of our books. I won't point at them because I've got a smart camera that will change focus on both of the books
right
behind me. You've been managing editor for both of those and written for both of those. I'm so glad that you were able to come in today to talk a little bit about you and your chapter. Start by telling us a little bit about yourself, my friend, your history and your interests.
Well, I figured this question was coming, but I wanted to tell you, I grew up, I'll start out this way. I grew up living in a castle, listening to the lions roar at dusk, and feeling the cool, hot air, come up the gully across the tops of the trees as I looked out into the sunset from the porch of the second story, porch is what we called it, battlement of the castle. But all of that is to say, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, near the zoo. So in a large stone house that was quarried from mineral wells, which is maybe 75 miles away. And so when it was built in the late 30s, early 40s, that house it was, well, I guess it was during the 30s, because during the Depression, the guy that wanted to build the house was a railroad entrepreneur. And so he wanted to keep his trains running and the quarry running. So he he kind of did it all on spec. Like, I will, I'm going to fund this big project, which is to build this big stone house and on an acre of land.
Started, I was sure that you were exaggerating or, some sort of parable or some story that you had a point to it. No, you're saying this literally was.
Yes, literally. I grew up in a 4-story stone house with very special stone that was quarried in mineral wells, which looks like, what it is. It's fossilized weeds, aquatic leaves that have just folded down. So if you look closely, you go, oh, that looks like a bunch of leaves that have all folded over and been crushed by dirt. Yeah, thousands of years ago. So maybe more. Anyway, yeah, it was really, and my parents sold that house eventually and bought the one I'm in now, actually, which you can't see, but they I'm still in Fort Worth, but I'm now on the other side of Texas Christian University, both physically and figuratively. I graduated from there in '86, so and I'll drop this for a moment so you can see this house behind me. What I'm sitting on now was also a 2nd-story porch at one time, like I used to listen to the Lions on. However, it's been wrapped in these legacy jalousie windows, and you can see the brick up there above the whole house is made out of that. Every exterior wall is made out, well, not every, because like this exterior wall was added on top of the balcony, but the primary walls of the house, which has been expanded a little, all concrete cinder block, which is a fantastic building material. And just so is stone. And I mentioned all that because I went back and I listened to Jacob and Ben and because I wanted to get ahead of you on the questions, but but anyway, no, I thought it was interesting because they both, talked about things that last, right? Types of energy systems in Jacob's case, and Ben was talking about financial systems and business systems and just the physical architecture of the world we live in. And that stone house I lived in, amazing. This cinder block house I'm living in, it's amazing. And like when I visited Europe, when I say visited Europe, when I was stationed there as a soldier, there's houses there that are hundreds of years old. And one of the French naval officers I've made a connection with let us stay in his house for a week because our occasion to visit, he was actually going to be out of town. So we had like a day and a half together. They left town and we left and threw the key back in the mail slot after. And I think they actually came back the next day, but I had to be back at U.S. European Command the next day. So I wasn't going to dally around. But those types of permanents, I think they're a testament to people. Where am I from? You ask, tell me a little about yourself. But these are the kinds of things I think about, like these permanent testaments of architecture, and how in America, for example, we are the new world. We do things a new way, right? We're not run by a king, or we fought a revolution to get rid of the king, right? We wanted a government by the people, and of course, it wasn't tagged that until 20 years later, or whatever, 4 score, and I don't know, a bunch of years later. But by, for, and of the people, we wanted some human enlightenment and human reason to drive the changes. And we created the technology to do what we do, which is, hey, you know what? Old idea, get rid of that building. It used to be a saying when I studied urban development in college back at TCU down the street. So they've got old ideas, get new buildings, new ideas, get old buildings. That kind of, hermit crab thing. Whereas as your factory gets bigger, you don't necessarily have to buy a bigger factory. You look around for somebody who else is ready to move up to a larger scale, and you go occupy that next space. But now it's almost, we're almost to the point like the Star Trek replicator in everybody's ideal post-work world, but instead of getting a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, you get a house, where it's like, or you go, you know what? We don't need a business. We don't need an office building here. We need a factory. And it just the next day it's gone. I'm looking across the street at what was one of two beautiful houses that a singular architect had put together. They're both very similar floor pattern, but each with their own little unique differences. Now one of them's an empty field, and the other one is still a wonderful house. So anyway,
You and I are both roughly the same age. And so when we were growing up and we wanted to buy something, we'd go into, at least in my case, to the little town square. And each little shop had a few things. Some of them had been there for 15 years or whatever, a little dusty or whatever, and you get what you wanted. Hard to do an Amazon mega complex in one of those little bitty things.
right, you're
I
not going to put a
remember when they
gigafactory
started
in there.
doing the big box places, right? The big box replaced all the little shops, and now all the big box, like a Sears or a Kmart or whatever, replaced by a colossal Amazon. You're right. We just keep bulldozing what was good 10 years ago and starting from scratch.
And there's merit to that, but it was really, I mean, touring and living in Europe and in Germany and France, and the level of permanence that's there just sort of blew my mind. Even though I lived in a 50-year-old house, and this house that I'm in now was built in 1938, so it's getting close to the 100-year mark. Yeah, it's and I think with I know, like Ben mentioned, nanotechnology, and cognitive technology, and the kind of Neuralink is Musk's term for it. I like the cognotech term that comes out of the London Futurists there. But that cognotech, where you can, like, directly from your mind, or through radio wave, et cetera. I mean, it's a real thing. You are programming the manufacturing functions of a bunch of nanobots that can come in and I was impressed at how precise the big giant machine looked like a backhoe, but it was so much bigger. It came in and it just crushed the house and scooped it and scraped it, and did, because it just had the kind of a bucket scoop, but it would use it to smash and to scoop. So just leveled that place and created a little pile of broken lumber and independent bricks, and then a bulldozer that was twice the size of a riding mower. Not a big giant bulldozer, but a little one that could get into this smaller yard from when they were plotting houses back in the 30s and 40s. Scooped all that stuff into the back of a truck. It pushed it, and they scooped it into the back of a truck, and all of it was gone in a day.
Right, and which would have been a month-long project by dozens of low-paid, struggling folks in the past. You're right. Oh, you're right. Hey,
Yeah.
why don't you go on and tell us a little bit about the chapter that you wrote?
Yeah, that's why I've kind of delayed talking about that, because as the editor, I started on one chapter, and I started on another, and then I read somebody else's paper that came in. I'm like, oh, I want to get that idea in there, and at some point I was like, okay, I don't have a chapter. What I have is a whole bunch of paragraphs of different ideas, and I just pushed all that to the side, and I said, I'm going to use AI and ask it to write, for me. So with a lot of coaching, and I used two different AIs, and of course Grammarly to check it all at the end. But I gave it these ideas of victory and wisdom, Nike and Sophia having a conversation. So it's done like a Socratic dialogue. So it was interesting because it wasn't like I just said, oh, give me a Socratic dialogue and hit go or whatever. I mean, first I had to hit the books and go, what makes it a proper Socratic dialogue, right? It's not just that there's questions and answers. and then I had to coach the AI into doing it. Of course, as our systems get better, hopefully our own heads will get better, and we can just say, give me a Socratic, conversation about this topic. Here's the pro and con side, and it'll give it to us.
Let me just make an observation is that one of the first people in our group to immediately leap onto the power of using the machine intelligence for writing was Art Ramon. And at the time, this is last year's book, I was strictly in the zone where I was going to write every word, and even for this year's book. But for next year's, I'm clearly have drifted over, and the power of this sort of examination, the leverage that you get for bringing in a lot of words in seconds that follow what you want to do and what your point is very powerful. And so I've been converted. I was very easily into the mode where I could generate art with the machine intelligence because I don't really have a whole lot of talent or patience. But for the writing, I wanted to do it myself. I'm changing my mind. I have the ideas that I want to get across, the perspective or the opinion, and then I ask for more writing and more evidence from the AI. So I'm going with you.
Those are, it's a tool like any other. And I don't think that, I don't consider AI doing the writing for me. Not really, because I will write something and I can get ideas on paper. And as a science fiction writer, I'm in a local writers group and I'll read my stuff and they go, oh, you're trying to pack too many different ideas in there. And to me, that's like, okay, I'm marching toward the sound of the guns, but as I read science fiction, especially older science fiction, what science fiction writers that are talking about science and technology and not just a speculative story about the future, that they pick one thing to change, like, what if cars ran on water? Boom. And then they deal with the story about that, or that info. And whenever I've read that, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's, people made this change and that change and society adapted, but that's never how things work. Right? It's not like, oh, what if radios were TVs? It's like, and in a science fiction, kind of classic science fiction model story, it's like, well, you would just swap radios and TVs. But in reality, there's going to be a legacy system, right? There will still be, just like we still have Post-it notes and messengers, et cetera, and notepads.
Let me go on to your comment about science fiction, and let's talk for a moment about a couple of things. One of which is that excellent logo behind you, and the second is your shirt. And let me just say a little bit about that. Is lifelong Star Wars fan. I saw the original movie in the theater because, of course, we didn't have the interwebs when you and I were kids, right? We went and saw it. So I love the Star Wars. And the second thing is I'm mortified at the 50% cut that some are proposing against NASA science budget. And so I'm a force for science as well, my friend. So why don't you tell us about the resistance and your shirt?
Sure. Well, the Force for Science shirt is put out by a science organization that I don't even know what it's called. It's AAAMS, I think. It's on the back in tiny letters. And I don't know what they do, but for whatever reason, they gave me a T-shirt, and which I thought was really cool. I'm a force for science. So that's the message. Then I realized, like, it's not their acronym, what's the IFFS, it's like, no, it's not. It's, so anyway, but I do think we all need to be a force for science, right? Because it doesn't have to take away from what we do. And I'll go back to this using AI to write. There's key things that I need to know when I tell it, write this from a conservative perspective, use these type of words for conservative language, have the other person write from, or, speaking from a libertarian perspective, right? And use these type of words. And then here's a third person, they're going to be a progressive and they're going to use this, list type of words. And and then I can get it to write the same story, my story that I've already written, right? I can get it to rewrite it 3 different ways in less than 30 minutes, right? And then I can read and look at each one and say, okay, that sounds like the computer said that, and then I convert it to real dialogue, something that a person would say. And I think that anyway, I think those tools are really helpful, and they are tools. So, Force for Science and the Resistance. No, the beauty of doing Zoom interviews is having your computer in front of you to research. The War on Art is a book by Stephen Pressfield. So I thought I would remember that name during this interview, but yeah, I mentioned it once already. That book is a great book and talks about, emotionally going toward that resistance. So when these people say, "Oh, you got too many ideas in there," I like this idea. I consider that the resistance right there, because that's not how reality. Not that it has to be real, right? Don't let reality stand in the way of a good story, but it's got to be understandable that when somebody creates a bionic arm on the one side, then somebody is going to create a biologic arm on the other, right? So you can use, or they're going to create a nanotechnology version, or they're going to create a digital version that's an arm somewhere else, like out in outer space, that you can use, right? Without, sitting comfortably on your porch looking out at the world. And so I think all those ideas about it's going to be this way or that way, it's sort of silly. I mean, it's like the reason that there's only data in Star Trek. It's like, well, it's because it's hard to make robot characters or a lot of robots for your TV show, right? So we'll write in a little backstory. There was a robot revolution and we got rid of all that, but that's not really how stuff works, right? I mean, there might be a robot revolution, but just like like the first cars were electric. It's not like that's a new thing, electric cars. It's just that cars that run on benzene are much more mobile and versatile, and it's easier to transport the fuel and all that. So, and yeah, I'll let Jacob Milburn talk about that. He's got that down. Yeah, I mean, when we're not going to get nuclear cars either, because you've got to have a certain scale to get a reaction, so to speak, unless it's just going to be a decaying uranium heater, right? Which might work for you. It works for robots on Mars, but I think we're never going to be a one solution anything really, society or government and I think that a lot of people look for that. What's the pill I can take for this? As opposed to, oh, well, can I just exercise? Or, oh, can I just, well, no, it's diet, exercise, and it's also rest. You can't just exercise all the time. You just pass out or whatever. So all those combinations have to come together to make something work really well, to be integrated, be well-rounded, to be sustainable in that sense, right? And also to be able to be resilient so that if the system takes some damage, it can then heal itself and move on.
Very good. Let's go on a little bit to the economic singularity, if you don't mind, because that is kind of one of the things that we focus on in our Future Visions books. And, one of the things that I want to hear you talk about is, for example, do you think that the economic singularity is likely to occur in the next 10 years? And if not, when, if ever?
Well, if you had read my article in the first book, no, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. No, I have an opinion. I think the singularity is a real thing, and it's a physics term, and you discuss that in your latest chapter of the new book very well. No point in making the spoiler out of that. But this idea of just the word itself, singularity, and it conjures up the idea of a single event. singular event. And it's important to note that a singularity is really a horizon. And that's in a mathematical sense, right? And even if when people talk about, oh, if you go into a black hole, the big problem you face is spaghettification, because the top, your head is responsive to gravity over here. And your feet are responsive to this greater gravity over there, and you're being stretched out like a piece of spaghetti. Well, if you said, does that sound like a singularity to you? Most people would say, no, that sounds like you're being stretched as a piece of spaghetti for eternity. It's like, and so once you say, oh, for eternity, that's what makes it a singularity, right? That, and you can't predict what happens after, right? It's like when a parabolic curve goes vertical, all the answers after that are on the same x-axis. So I say all that to move on with what I think about the singularity and when it will come, is that it's not going to be, as I say in the first edition, Future Visions, it's not going to be on a Tuesday. And I tried to make a cute, because I'm a writer, I want to make a little cute acronym of the upcoming economic singularity day, right? The upcoming, and so it's not written in stone that it's going to happen, highly likely, most probable course of human events, probably. It's not guaranteed, but even if it does happen, it's not going to happen, like I say, on a Tuesday. That you're going to wake up, you're going to go to bed Monday night, and it's the ordinary world, and you literally wake up in a new world the next day, right? It's where nothing works the same. But if you took a caveman and brought him to New York City, that's what they would think, right? But because they've missed out on all the intervening years, and they don't have historians to go, oh yeah, 428, when Claudius said, I guess we're done here. That's when the Roman Empire ended. It's like, no, it's probably like 100-year period, right? For the final collapse of the Roman Empire. And I think that's true. A great example, the Korean War, North and South Korea, primarily the US fighting on one side, but they declared peace, so to speak, and a ceasefire. But both sides knew that when the firing ceased, whatever those positions are were going to be their bargaining chips. So while there had been a confrontational stalemate for weeks, right? When they said, oh, we're going to have a ceasefire that's going to start in a week, all of a sudden both sides launched into full combat mode, right? And just to get a few more yards, just to get the next hill, just to get, around the bend or the other side of the river. And silly as that sounds, and the waste of lives and all that sort of stuff. When historians look back, they're not going to say, oh, what they'll most likely say, based on what other historians have said, is like, oh, the Korean War ended here when they did this ceasefire. Not that it went on for weeks and, over maybe 3 days here and 5 days there and a full 7 on the other end. So I think there's going to be a lot of that going on with the singularity, right? There are lots of factors, and I've been saying this since the 80s, because, man, I got my Commodore 64 with a tape deck and cassette tape, data recording, and man, I was browsing bulletin boards, and I told people, I said, one of these days, your phone number is just going to be like your name, which they all standing on the steps of TCU over there in 1986. They're like, nah, man, nobody's going to go, nobody's name is going to be like 817-924, whatever. And I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we'll be using numbers and characters. And for your number, you'll just say Alan Crowley, Mike DiVerde, number 3. If they're, for the Smiths, you might be John Smith, number 755, right? And that is exactly what we do now, is we use our emails that way, and our emails work with the text and et cetera. So I talk to my phone, I say, call Mike. It's like, it does its thing, right? I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, all of that to say that this idea that it's all going to happen in a day or overnight is something on it. Now, your question does, so when will it happen? Maybe it's going to be in a decade, within the decade, but it'll be in 20 years when we say 10 years ago, that's when the singularity happened.
And that's fair. That is a very good answer. And I was going to tease you about dancing around the question. I'm going to point out a couple of things. One is by using the term economic singularity, we're having enough trouble getting people to face the possibility that all the jobs are going to go away. Who knows when? That's not what we're talking about. Is you need some way of getting across there's a massive transformation about to occur. And so if I had to say to somebody today, Great Depression, they know what we're talking about. And of course, that was a 10-year period of misery. And it wasn't over just because we went to war with Germany, right? It was
right.
War
That
II.
was the moment. That was
And the transition to economic prosperity occurred a lot longer, but then really took off like a rocket ship. So part of it was to get something that could concisely get across the idea. And then I'm going to point out that you used parabolic graph as an example and say to you that this may occur so rapidly that your head spins. I think we're already seeing some of that with the emergence of some of the generative machine intelligence, perhaps agentic coming on. This is happening extremely rapidly. But anyway, let's go on to what would you, if you just gave the good example of, let's say that in 10 years it occurs in seriousness, but it'll take us 20 years until we're at the point at which we said it occurred. So the question for you then is, how would you define the onset? Say you're 20 years from now, you're looking back as a historian, what would you look as the defining feature of an economic singularity?
I mean, I'm sure viewers, listeners are probably familiar with Callum Chase's work, the economic singularity, which really prompted, I think, probably everybody who's started on this project and who's with it now, gave them the motivation to get started on this. Thank you, Callum. But in any case, I think he lays out a good definition of this idea of the point at which you can't tell what's going to happen next. That singularity horizon is when it's that transition from where you have a whole lot of people losing their jobs to automation or cognitive automation or whatever you want to call it, to some sort of offloaded to a machine of some kind. That employment level is coming down, and in some degrees, prosperity is going up because those, for one, those people that are out of a job, they're not just a marble that you move from one category to another. They can climb themselves back into some other job, or they can be doing other things. Like my wife and I, we're in the iron and steel business. She irons and I steel. I mean, I don't know that crime will be rampant, but that's a possibility. And I don't know that just maybe it'll just be an unemployment malaise, like I got a job to go to, but I got lots of cheap booze, or whatever. So, which those are equally disastrous situations. Some types of moral malaise. But I think there's some point there where it kind of begins, right? That's where this sort of spectrum of going onto this road of things not working right. And then I think at some point we hit a position where, okay, automation has made everything as cheap as possible, but now jobs are so few, it's kind of restricted to the people that know how to manage artificial intelligence systems, and who, the nanobot controller guy, and he's got a job to do, and the RNA gene sequencing, technicians got something to do.
Or the guy who's flying all the drones for the inevitable wars that are going to occur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Oceania and Eurasia. I mean, you got to have drone pilots for that, right? But I think we'll transition through all that, and it's somewhere at the sort of the bottom of that, where you've got things that can be made incredibly inexpensively. There's the potential for productivity in the market, but the opportunities are not there for it. So whether that takes reschooling or retooling or different value system, right? What if handmade things became, that's the new scarcity, right? Is a handmade, anybody can get a machine made, BMW. I want one of the handmade ones, whatever, right? So I think that point right there, and I don't know exactly where that horizon is, and I think that all of the terms that we use are nebulous enough that we'd have to make sure we were all on the dictionary version to really to make these ideas more precise. Now you've gotten, and I know you've gone toward this, and I think you've made a great step forward. Spoiler, read his, it's first in the book for a reason. And mine's at the end for a reason. That's modesty, But the other point is that just like it's not a singular technological development that moves us forward, right? It's this combination, this back and forth, kind of Hegel's dialectic between the steam engine run by oil and the steam engine run by the sun or a decaying rock. It's not just one or the other. It's both, and it's many. And I think that if we look around the planet and take a snapshot at any time in the last 4,000 years, what we'll notice is that some places look more advanced than others. And this changes over time too, right? I mean, the Aztecs, by far more advanced in irrigation and whatever than the Europeans or whatever, were viewed as like savages and barbarians, right? Whereas the Romans probably would have looked at them and said, oh, they have an aqueduct system like us, but instead of bringing it into cities and fountains, they use it to irrigate the whole countryside. Angkor Wat was probably the same way. It's a whole nation that's been put under an agriculture, a monsoon controlling system technology, right? It's just waterways. And, how do people figure that out? Well, you dig a ditch and let water flow through it. I mean, it's just, doesn't require, no aliens required.
Your perspective there, kind of worldwide and over many centuries, then leads right into the next question, which is, how do you think that humanity should deal with the economic singularity?
So for the same reasons that we have a patchwork of technologies around the planet now, and I think that we won't have a singularity. It might happen Tuesday in the US because we're highly dependent on technology, but a more agricultural country might be like, singularity, schmingularity, whatever, it doesn't affect them because they're still in kind of a agricultural mode, and this can happen at any point, I guess. The solar powered society, becomes a bust if there's a meteor crash that clouds the skies. The folks that are still using antiquated oil, well, they got plenty of power.
Well, Venezuela and Ethiopia are probably not going to have it at the same moment we do. Okay, so do you think that we'll ever achieve superabundance? I think I know your answer.
I mean, what was that question in between there, though? One was about the timing of the singularity, and the next one was about,
well, how do you think that humanity should deal with the economic singularity?
Yeah, and I wanted to come back to that, and I just want to come back to because should implies can. Okay, so if we're talking about the perspective of humanity, let's identify that we're going to have multiple singularities popping up around the globe at multiple, or sweeping the globe, or however it moves across the globe, over at multiple times, right? It's sort of like the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we'll have those. Yeah, thank you to William Gibson there. Anyway, those things that I'll do this way. Those things that we're putting together as a solution here, by the time that technological solution is needed somewhere else, there might be a better technological solution. So they might actually be finding a different solution to the singularity than we use here. And I think that those multiple forces, multiple factors, and multiple locations of intensity of singularity, right, are the exact kind of thing I'm talking about. That don't lead to a clear-cut line. So how do we handle it? Can we? I mean, I think it'll have to be locally, it'll have to be regionally, and it will also have to be interconnectedly, because I think there'll need to be a lot of sharing of best practices. Yeah, so that's how we should.
I think
Regionally,
you and I
locally,
are relatively similar in how we approach this, and I have a hope. This is just a hope and a dream, but and there is a version of realism here. What I think is likely to happen is the economic singularity might be, and let me just roughly a decade of abysmal economic conditions throughout the world, different levels of abysmal, depending on where you are in which country in the world. But my hope is that we go through this decade of pain, but at the end of that era, I'm hopeful that some form of artificial superintelligence concocts a plan of how to harness all of those mechatronic devices, the artificial intelligence, the robots, and industrial capacity to distribute a superabundance throughout the world, and not have it all just end up in Muskrat's $1 trillion pocket, or
Right.
Jeff Bozo the clown we end up with 2 trillionaires, and the rest of us are penniless eating tortillas and beans. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, at some point you got to be able to buy those things, or they're not worth making. Yeah.
Well, I think just to appease the crowd, if you go back, you were mentioning the Romans, right? The bread and circuses
Yeah.
of just handing out beans and tortillas. And, my first wife was from Mexico. One of the things she talked about was, I always wondered why there wasn't a revolution in Mexico, because the wealth inequality was very bad, single political party. And what I found out over time was Mexico was doing a pretty good job of making sure people literally had tortillas and beans so that they survived, and they weren't starving, their kids weren't starving, and there wasn't a revolution. You just kind of placate people with the littlest amount. So let's say that there's just a lot of football and baseball games on TV all the time. So there's sports, there's some.
Now the clown show in DC right now is better than any other event. It is WWE and reality TV all rolled into one, and or whatever the wrestlers call them.
So for
anyway,
me, the question
but the thing is, they're cutting the bread line.
So for me, the question about how to deal with economic singularity actually was linked to superabundance. That question, I think many of us in this are looking for a way towards superabundance. I think we're starting to see that the beginnings of, you've seen in some of my episodes on robots in space, where I'm sometimes focusing on the humanoid bots and some of the dexterity and the manipulation and the decision making. You see the ingredients for perhaps having a huge, cheap workforce to provide for everybody, not just the rich. That's
right.
kind of where I was going with that but the transition, I'm going to use a probably not a very good example, but the switch from mercantilism to capitalism took a long time 500 years ago, whenever it occurred, right? But at the end of it, we were all much better off, okay? Much better developments. And maybe there's a transition period where we then harness artificial superintelligence would be my fever dream, to achieve superabundance so that there's nobody starving or dying for lack of vaccines. But,
Yeah.
let me.
And, okay, so and that goes back to this other sort of thing about it's hard to find a one-all solution when, and here we're talking about sort of willful ignorance of folks that are not interested in understanding science and not interested in using reality to make reality better. So I mean, it's it's funny. My wife and I kind of tease each other that I'm the guy talking about the blue sky, and I tease her about being the black abyss, right? But between the two of us, right, with the wisdom of the crowd, there we can get to a pretty good ground level base truth, right? Or and we tease each other about that. So anyway, but I think that's the case. I really want to be optimistic, but I've been married for 35 years now, she's taught me a thing or two, and I'm like, probably ain't going to go that way, and yet I also know, as horrible as I can conceive it, right, probably not going to go that way either, right? And that we will be somewhere in the middle of that cone of probability, right? Now, I think ultimately, when we get to the rock bottom of singularity, so to speak, when it just gets bad enough, at least here in the US, let's say, right? Because that might come later for Europe and even later for more agrarian areas. If we don't latch on to those things that are critical for the success of civilization, energy, and really it's just energy, right? Like it's, you can say energy and food production and yada yada, but how are you producing your food? Are you going out there and laboring in the field on your own every day? Is that the energy you're using? Or are you using a diesel, are you using a cow? Because that's a big step up, right? Or are you using a diesel tractor? Or does your diesel tractor go out there and, do it itself, right? Or does, automated, or is it an electric tractor that's fueled off of, solar or nuclear generator, right?
Or uses lasers to shoot down the weeds, okay, which is another current. No, really, I mean,
right. That's very precision cutting, right?
And you're right about this.
On mass scale.
This is what's magic about Jacob and his focus on energy and some of the new modular nuclear. But, going back to your black and white pessimism, optimism,
Sure.
I tend to frame it for simplicity in the discussion of cyberpunk versus solar punk. Okay.
Yeah. And it works. I'm not a fan of it. But anyway,
I know you aren't. But let me just say that leads to the next question is, because of, let's say, a version where artificial superintelligence might produce super abundance, or it might just funnel incredible wealth to two bozos. Okay. So are you concerned at all about the arrival of artificial superintelligence?
Well, I say no in general, right? Because I think there may be a dozen good ones and a dozen bad ones, and ultimately we'll get a couple of mediocre ones that'll work. I think, and that is also what allays my concerns about Bezos and whoever it turns out to be, Gates, and a handful of the 5 or 6 wealthiest people here, and the one from maybe every other country in the world, that whatever, that 1%. Those folks, so what if they own everything, if that abundance is available to all, even if it's not at the same level of abundance, right? Now, it's one thing if, even the French peasant in the field, who was mucking up it was like, yeah, but I live in the nation that's, with the greatest king in the world, it's like, and, 2 or 3 Louis later, they're like, let's get the hell out of here. We need to cut some heads off. But so I think, and that's sort of the risk that governments take and oligarchies take, is that they are fewer in number and et cetera. But I mean, if you can go over to your food replicator and hit the button and get you a ham and cheese on rye with, hot milk or whatever, right? I mean, you're really going to be worried about, oh yeah, but I don't actually own the house. Probably not, right? I mean, maybe. I mean, look at us now. We have hot and cold running water, and we have roofs over our head. I mean, most people. I'm not saying it's, but in this nation, while we have an obscenely high number of unhoused and poorly housed folks, for the amount of wealth here, certainly, but the majority of our folks are pretty good access to food and clothing and housing, with their paycheck, and yet there's plenty to complain about. So I don't think humanity will run out of things to complain about. No, I think the advent of super intelligence, it can do something that human governance has real trouble doing, and that is to be unbiased. Now, their bias is built into the system. You've probably seen the hand dryer that wouldn't dry black people's hands because it was designed by light reflected up from from a white hand. Anyway, so I mean, you can build bias into the systems, but usually that's done, but it's probably not nearly as biased as a judge in the South Dallas court, or as biased as maybe a police officer in Grapevine, Texas, or whatever. So I think that's something that although I would prefer to build the system first and let the other just fall away, that probably a lot of government activity, processing checks, collecting revenue, making all that banking, that could all be done digitally. And a lot of functions could have portal access that was really well done and made it easy to communicate to our elected and non-elected representatives, right?
The reason that I founded the OmniFuturist is that I saw no serious efforts to actually plan for this sort of a future where perhaps there's a large uprooting of people, and how would we reconstruct our government and our economy for this new reality. And so this sort of topic of, and my fear is, of course, that we're going to kind of stumble and bumble our way into the future instead of, you just described, I would prefer to plan a system out in advance for this. None of that is occurring.
Right.
So that's kind of the focus of these books, is to try to get people thinking about what we ought to be doing for planning this. So
yeah, and that goes back to the first thing, is a vision, right? I mean, and that's like when I talked about writing the story. I wrote it once, but I had my vision, and then I knew I wanted my protagonist to speak differently, because you don't want to hear just two versions of me talking to myself, right? And so I got the conservative and the politically conservative, politically liberal, and politically progressive people.
You guys here to make the address, Kurt?
Okay, all right, I'll be down in a minute. Thanks. Okay. I could really dial that in using the computer and the technology to do that, right? But you've got to know what you want to be able. I mean, if you don't know what you want, a computer's going to give it to you just as quickly as it'll give you what you do want, right? So again, that requires, I think it's a little bit different, fundamental kind of learning, much more like the classical liberal education in the sense of liberal education. But it also requires skills. One needs to know how to do a lot of the programming and stuff too. So, although I got computers for that.
Alan, you're a busy man, so we're going to wrap up with this last question, sir. What other topic is first and foremost in your mind? So let me give you some examples. You got space travel and colonization, or super longevity, or crypto, geopolitics, quantum mechanics, or quantum computers. What's your thing?
Well, let's just say yes. No, actually, I brought, okay, so here's The Case for Space by Robert Zubrin. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, maybe not. The Case for Space.
Shows up and then it flicks out. Yeah. So that works great.
So I like Robert Zubrin's work. He's one of the founders of the
Mars Society, right?
The Mars Society, formerly the L5 Society. They just moved a little farther out. The other one is Seasteading, and this is a great book. Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians, by Joe Quirk. So Seasteading, highly recommended. Another one of my favorite topics. And then Jose Cordero, but his book, The Death of Death, so living longer and longevity. And then the Transhumanist Reader, wonderful book, but similar to our own work in that it's a collection of authors, although they all tend to be pro-futurist, pro-technologist, so it's a very human-machine mix kind of book. And I know you want to wrap up, Mike, and I got to go, but let me see if I can. This Seasteading book by Joe Quirk talks about creating floating nations at sea, and I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm not sure I like the idea of carving up the United States into private fiefdoms, which own, and creating city-states that are privately owned and privately operated, that compete for people to live in them. Because I think that typically,
what you're referring to, I'm going to put more of a label on it. There's a group of dark MAGA neo-reactionaries who think that we should switch from the American Republic, a form of representative democracy, into regions ruled by CEO tech magnates as being more efficient. And that is an incredibly repulsive idea to me. It's embarrassing because I'm very much interested in science and technology. And I think that technocrats, and I mean real technocrats, not these pseudo idiots,
not you and me,
trying to sell neo-reactionaries, right? So yes, I agree with you on that. I want to also say, if I had a choice, you just talked about living on Mars versus seasteading. If I had to live in a tunnel for the rest of my life under Mars to be safe from radiation, versus some island in the Pacific that was artificially created, I might take the Tahiti solution. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially when there's fish to catch and,
air to breathe.
Yeah. I heard you discussing the, what do they call that, golden rice that's got extra vitamin A, and there's the saltwater resistant rice and the high protein rice. Yeah.
Just saying.
So I end that on a warning note. We have voted for a patchwork of nation states.
Very strange future ahead. We are going to wrap now. Alan, fantastic. We're going to do this again because you and I have a lot to talk about. Alan Crowley, managing editor of the OmniFuturists, a great futurist, a great author, great editor. Appreciate your time and your interest.
I'm grateful to be on the team, Mike. Really, thank you.
We are having fun, aren't we?
Yeah, no, and thank you for, I know he's watching. David Shapiro and Callum Chase got some serious ideas, and thank you for introducing me to those folks.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time with it. So thank you again, and we'll talk later. Bye-bye.
And
OmniFuturists